a treasury of American folklore, with stories, legends, tall tales, traditions, ballads, and songs of the American people. Edited by B.A. Botkin and Foreword by Carl Sandberg. Foreword. We have heard of the boy and his sister coming home from school to tell their mother, "We learned today that we have been talking prose all our lives and we didn't know it." Likewise, many of us grown-ups have talked a lot of folklore in our lives, and we didn't know what was folklore. And if we had known, it wouldn't have made much difference. You can't stop them from telling it, even if they politely warn you beforehand. Stop me if you heard this. They, or we, are irrepressible as the tenacious debating opponent of whom Abraham Lincoln said in 1858 that the only way you could make him quit would be to stop his mouth with a corncob. So here we have nothing less than an encyclopedia of the folklore of America. An encyclopedia is where you get into the boxcar of numbers. There have been many small fry collections of folklore, we might say, but this one is a big shot. It will pass the time, furnish laughter, provide entertainment. And then besides giving you the company of nice yarn spinners, it will give you something of a feel of American history, of the gloom chasers that moved many a good man who fought fire and flood, varmints and vermin, as region after region is filled with the settlers and homesteaders who proclaimed, "We're breaking sod for unnumbered millions to come." And now that the days of those pioneers are past, we have cities and skyscraping structures of steel and concrete that would have amazed them, motion pictures and radio transmissions that someone declared plumb ridiculous. Not to mention the tractors which can plow without mules, and storm-proof all-steel buggies and wagons that do better than a mile a minute without a horse to pull. And this smart later generation of youth has its folklore, and our encyclopedia has plenty of specimens of little Audrey, of Knock-Knock Who's There, of the little moron who, being told he was dead, ordered that he should be moved into the living room. Something rather sweetly modern and quite impossible to see is coming alive out of the former generation is such a story that the editor dug out of Chicago Industrial Folklore by Jack Conroy. There it was hiding out in the manuscripts of the Federal Writers Project of the Works Progress Administration for the state of Illinois. It tells about Sappy Hopper, the world's biggest, fattest, bestest signs painter, and is a fresh modern masterpiece worth standing alongside the well-liked antiques which will not fail to be passed along from generation to generation. A long-time book is this. One reading won't do for it. There are places in it where good fools have such love for other good fools that places in it that they must trade the follies and whims of their imaginations to help forget their troubles and even their tragedies. Excellent authority tells us that the right laughter is medicine for weary bones, and on many a page here one may find a droll smile or the rocking laughter that moved many a humble and honest struggler on American soil as he studied, with whatever of mind he had, what the present of his country was, and what the future might be. The people, or the folk of the present hour, that is, and of the future that it may be, many and many of them are seen here from their toil, struggle, and laughter, are heard and made known in part in the heaped up and sprawling materials of this book, the degrees of the human diversity of these United States. Carl Sandberg. Introduction. 1. When I began to think of a book of American folklore, I thought of all the good songs and stories and all the good talk that would go into it, and of what a richly human and entertaining book it would be. A book of American folklore, I thought, should be as big as the country of ours, as American as Davy Crockett and as universal as Brer Rabbit. For when one thinks of American folklore, one thinks not only of the folklore of American life, the traditions that have sprung up on American soil, but also of the literature of folklore, the migratory traditions that have been found and home here. Because folklore is so elemental, and folk songs and stories are such good neighbors and pleasant companions, it is hard to understand why American folklore is not more widely known and appreciated. For the word folklore is partly responsible. Folklore is a scholar's term for something that is as simple and natural as singing songs and spinning yarns among the folk who know the nature and the meaning, but not the name, and certainly not the scholarship of folklore, because the word denotes both the material and its study, and has come to stand for more the study of the thing rather than the thing itself. Folklore. In fact, it seems to have become the possession of a few who study it rather than the many who make use of it. The evidence of folklore, however, is something that cannot be contained by a definition, but what grows upon one with folklore experience. Old songs, old stories, old sayings, old beliefs, customs, and practices, the mind skills and hand skills that have been handed down so long to seem to have a life of their own, a life that cannot be destroyed by print, but constantly has to get back to the spoken word to be renewed. Patterned by a common experience, varied by individual repetition, inventive or forgetful, and cherished because somehow characteristic or expressive, all this, for want of a better word, is folklore. Complementary to the "stop me if you've heard this" aspect of folklore is the trait implied on the comeback. That's not the way I heard it. But what makes the thing folklore is not only that you have heard it before, yet want to hear it again, because it is different, but also that you want to tell it again in your own way, because it is anybody's property. On the one hand, repeated telling establishes confidence in the rightness of what was said, and how it is said. On the other hand, the beauty of a folk lyric, tune, story, or saying is that if you don't like it, you can always change it, and if you don't, somebody else will. But if folklore is old wine in new bottles, it is also new wine in old bottles. It says not only, back where I come from, but also, where do we go from here? If this book is intended to bring the reader back to anything, it is not to the good old days, but to an enjoyment and understanding of living American folklore for what it is and what it is worth. This is an experience which Americans, as compared to other peoples, are sadly deficient. Perhaps it is because we're not one people, but many peoples in one, and a young people who have not grown up too close to the machine age. The industrial folk tales and songs in this book are evidence enough that the machinery does not destroy folklore. Rather, in our rapid development of the rural to agricultural to an urban and industrial folk, we have become estranged to the folklore of the past, which we cannot help feeling a little self-conscious or antiquarian about, without yet being able to recognize or appreciate the folklore of the present. Perhaps the best way to understand the songs and stories in this book is in terms of a species of living literature, which has no found form, in this respect different from the classics, which it resembles in permanence and universally in appeal, and which is constantly shifting back and forth between written and unwritten tradition. Since print tends to freeze a song or story, folklore is most alive, or at home out of print, in its purest form is associated with the grapevine and the bookless world. But that does not make it synonymous with illiteracy or ignorance, nor is it true that the educated do not also have their lore, or that lore ceases to be lore as soon as it is written or published. Folk literature differs from the rest of literature only in its history. Its author is the original forgotten man. Not only does folklore shift, but it changes as it shifts between the top and bottom layers of culture. As it gets nearer to the world of professional poets and storytellers, it tends to shape about its form as a formal literature tradition of its own, and in the great collections of legends and folk tales that have come down to us from ancient and medieval times and have been pored over by scholars. But alongside this is more classic folk literature, which has acquired scholarly prestige and which gives and takes erudition and humbler and homelier folk literature of everyday life and the common man. Today's people literature, which is older folk literature may have been once, the difference between the two, a difference perhaps only by degree, was the difference, say, between the English and Scottish ballads and the Dust Bowl ballads of Woody Guthrie. This range of variation within the folklore field is a source of both strength and weakness. For while it enables folklore perpetually to rebuild itself from the ground up, it creates a kind of class consciousness among folklorists. Thus, the British folk song and the folk dance expert, Cecil J. Sharp, while very much taken with the vigor and beauty of our own mountain songs and dances, one is able to see in our cowboy songs anything but the fact that the cowboy has been despoiled of his inheritance of traditional song, and has nothing behind him, and nothing but himself and his daily occupations to sing about, and that it is a self-centered and self-conscious way. For example, cowboy's life is a dreadful life. I'm a poor, lonesome cowboy. I'm a lonely bull whacker, and so forth. Further complicating and diversifying the picture is a third quantity, midway between folk and academic, the popular. The latter is distinguished by its wider and more passing acceptance, the result of transmission through such timely media as stage, press, radio, and films. Yet the so-called lively arts, jazz, vaudeville, burlesque, comic strips, and animated cartoons, pulps, often have a folk basis or give new rise to new folk creations, such as Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. Many of the innovations of popular lore are associated with new inventions. For example, the Ford joke and the Gremlins. At the same time, many of our modern gags have an ancient and honorable, if sometimes wheezy, lineage. One about the two Irishmen, the Hebrew, and the Bologna, the Three Dreams, goes back to the 12th century, while the little moron jokes are as old as the Turkish Asardum and Nasreddin. Also, close to folk resources, but to be distinguished from folk literature proper, is literature about the folk. This ranges from old-timers' reminiscences. One of the great examples of the book is Martha L. Stewart's Going to God's Country, and homespun humor and verse to local color and regional stories and sketches, all of which throw light on the folk and folklore backgrounds, culminating in that small body of masterpieces of folk art, mined out of the collective experience and imagination of writers, known and unknown, which have succeeded in identifying themselves with the folk traditions. 2. It would be possible to get a good idea of American folklore by reading the 57 volumes of the Journal of American Folklore. Since, however, writers of all kinds are always making use of folklore one way or another, sometimes when one least expects it, one can turn up a surprising amount of good folklore simply by going through books, magazines, and newspapers. The present collection is a generous sampling, selected and arranged according to the interpretive principle of relating the material to certain folk motifs, such as hero worship, boasting, pranking, jesting, artistic lying, and the like. But further relating these activities to certain regional and occupational groupings, the book is designed to reveal the cultural pattern of which American folklore is part. The term American folklore is employed here in the sense that one speaks of American literature, language, humor, etc., as an expression of the land, the people, and their experience. The same images and symbols have permeated all parts of this expression, so that folklore, language, literature, humor are inseparable. American folklore is a much narrower and yet more definite concept than folklore in America, which includes not only all the Americas, but European folklore in America. For practical purposes, because I had to draw the line somewhere, I have limited myself to folklore in the English idiom in the United States, excluding necessarily the Indian and foreign language minorities. It is with considerable regret, and not with any intention of overstressing the Anglo-Saxon element, that I have had to dispense with the contrasts, loss of diversity, there may be in compensating gain in unity. That I have had to dispense with the contrast of these strips, stripes, and streaks of color. But for the resultant loss of diversity, there may be a compensating gain in unity. Even within these limits, I've collected a great deal more than I could find room for. In order to keep the book further in hand, 2 tests were applied to the selections: readability, with an emphasis on literature and especially narrative interest, and permanence and breadth of appeal. Articles and collections of data being ruled out, customs and beliefs are represented only as they enter into song and story. According to my conception of folklore as the stuff that travels and the stuff that sticks, the basic principle of selection, I have had to leave out much good material valuable to social history, rather than as folklore purely local in interest. At the same time, a certain amount of stuff that travels without sticking, or that sticks without traveling, has been included as representative of folklore in the making. And dealing with such a large mass of material from so many different sources, and of so many different types and tones, it sometimes becomes difficult to see the woods for the trees. I have chopped down a few trees here and lopped off a few branches there. It is also to clear a path through the wilderness. If I have preferred a little looseness and too much tightness of selection and arrangement, it is because I believe a smoother flow is achieved thereby, also because I wanted to give a mass effect of thousands of unknown singers and storytellers. To vary the pace and to show both the discrete and discursive folk imagination at work, short and long pieces have been intermingled in varying proportions. In those cases in which a song or story might have served more than one purpose, it has been placed where it seems to have the most effect. In the same way, have chosen variations of which that seem the most effective, though the reader will probably think of versions he likes better, possibly because possibly undesirable. Possibly because he knows them better. I would like to hear of these too. Wherever possible and desirable, I have preferred the earlier sources, though there are seldom, if ever, original sources of folklore. In the matter of text, I have left spelling, punctuation, etc. alone, in spite of inconsistencies, except where they might get in the way of the reader. Original titles have been retained for complete pieces, but in the case of excerpts, no attempt has been made to distinguish between the original and added titles. And the amount and nature of the introductory comments, in solid type, by the editor, 2 rules have been observed. 1, where material is already available in other books, as in various types of folk tales and folk songs, the comment has been kept to a minimum. Where the material is fairly fresh, as in the first 4 parts of the book, more comment has been deemed necessary. 2, the approach has been broadly literary and social rather than strictly folklorist, and uninitiated footnotes are by the author. 3, although for the most part I have preferred to let American folklore speak for itself, in one respect it is necessary to distinguish between folklore as we find it and folklore as we believe it ought to be. Folklore as we find it perpetuates human ignorance, perversity, and depravity, along with human wisdom and goodness. Historically, we cannot deny or condone the baser side of folklore, and yet we may understand and condemn it as we condemn other manifestations of human error. Folklore, like life itself, as the Santayara's phrase, animal in its origins and spiritual in its possible fruit. Much of the animalism, of course, does not appear here except for the implication because of the taboos surrounding print. What does come through, however, often in violent contradiction with our modern social standards, is the essential viciousness of many of our folk heroes, stories, and expressions, especially in their treatment of the minorities, Indians, Negroes, Mexican, Chinese, etc. Perhaps the most glaring example of this is in the story Roy Bean and the Chinaman, with its characteristic rough and antisocial humor and its ruthless frontier philosophy of necktie justice. This and like stories stick because they have a tang of life. They should be preserved, not to perpetuate, but to correct the errors they reveal. With this perspective, the whole of folklore may be an instrument for understanding and goodwill. A word should be said here about the movement that seeks to make folklore the basis of an entire social and art tradition. One can forgive folksiness, almost everything, its nostalgia, its quaintness, its cuteness, but not its clannishness, which is next to chauvinism, and which speaks to folklore in terms of racial heritage, or insists that the particular folk group or body of tradition is superior or pure. On the other hand, it is not necessary to go to the opposite extreme and to deny the importance of folklore, and even a healthy provincialism, as one of the ingredients, though not necessarily most important ingredients, of a well-rounded culture. It is hoped that, while preserving the normal view of folklore, the book may serve as an inspiration and a source book for writers, teachers, and others who are concerned with the materials of American culture. For the rest, I've tried to let the material flow as it is in shaping itself about our ways of thinking and feeling in America, much as the literature of American folklore may be said to shape itself around the folklore of American life. In this way, I've sought not only to give an American view of folklore, but a folk-side view of America. By going to almost every form and medium of writing about America, as well as to the regular folklore publications, I have hoped to give a broader and more living conception of American folklore than is to be gained from any single line or approach. 4. The source of each selection is indicated in a note at the foot of the page on which the selection begins. Where several selections appear on the same page, the sources are indicated in the same order. The source notes constitute at once a complete list of acknowledgments and have a selected bibliography. Special thanks are due to those who have contributed unpublished material, and to the Federal Writers Project, for which much of this material was originally written. Grateful acknowledgments are due to the many authors and publishers, selections from whose publications are included in this book. An exhaustive effort has been made to locate all persons having any rights or interests in the material, and to clear reprint permissions. If any required acknowledgments have been omitted or any rights overlooked, it is by accident, and forgiveness is desired. In addition to those who have read or discussed with me various parts of this book at one time or another during the 4 years it took which to take shape, the following have been close to the work as a whole. Paul R. Feebledson Faith, especially for this first compilation. Gertrude Botkin, my wife, who shared the labor with me from first to last. Hugo V. Wonguro, who made the music drawings. Crime publishers, consistently sympathetic with encouragement and support. Edmund Fuller, who first suggested an idea and name for the treasury of American folklore and saw through it to the end. Bertha Krantz, his assistant, who handled the permissions and served as a steadying influence. Charles Seeger, who served as a music consultant for the book. Finally, without the collections of the Library of Congress, with which my work as a fellow in folklore, as well as a folk song archivist, has brought me in close contact, this book would not have been possible. B. A. Botkin, Washington, D.C., March 1944.